Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Diet Doc Life Mastery Podcast. I'm Joe Klemczewski with Dr. Kori Propst, and we are going to stay in the stream we've been in talking about binge eating and all of the things that go into that. Specifically today, Kori, one of my favorite topics, which is triggers. How does this even happen? Because as I mentioned in one of our previous podcasts, the only time I've ever been involved with binge eating as kind of a cyclical thing that was scary to me, there were definite triggers, and a lot of them had to do with the foods I was eating, but there were some underlying things. I mean, just dieting too hard, doing too much cardio, and there are definitely more triggers than that. And you are the expert, and you're going to share all those with us.
There are definitely more triggers than that. And I work with a lot of people who are they're not dieting right now. They're not preparing for contests right now. They're not in a significant caloric deficit. But I will say this, like we've talked about, even if we're not in a biological caloric sort of place of deprivation, emotional deprivation and psychological deprivation can also be a big trigger for people to move to food to soothe and to numb and to avoid and to distract. But, you know, as I've been thinking through all of the different sorts of situations that I run into with my clients, I've been able to kind of categorize the triggers outside of, again, significant caloric restriction, categorize them into kind of three buckets that prompt that reaching for the substance. And they are problems, permanency, and personalization. So I thought we could go through each one of those, and I can give examples of what they mean and what they look like.
Absolutely. So problems, I think that could be a broad list, but at the same time, I think you are exactly as clear as you can be to say that there is something underlying this more times than not that is not biological. And I couldn't agree more. So let's go through some of those examples.
Okay. So I'm working with a client right now who, you know, because of COVID-19, she is not going to the office every day. She has her in-home office now. And like most of us who maybe weren't used to this sort of in-home situation, like I am, this is the way that I've been working for a while. So there really wasn't a transition for me. You know, it was very difficult for her at first. She's meeting with younger clients, you know, doing her Zoom meetings, and she's never used Zoom except to talk to me. And so being on the other side of it was very different, and it created a lot of anxiety for her. So this was a problem. This sense of unknown, these first times for things, a lot of discomfort, emotional discomfort around it. And now, currently, okay, so when that happened, she was moving towards food and feelings. That was a trigger for her to kind of reach out and to feel better. Now, as her organization is talking about transitioning back to some semblance of normalcy and where they were before, the thoughts that she's having is, I can't, I'm not ready, I don't want to, I literally just got comfortable doing this, and the people that I'm working with literally just got comfortable doing this. And so it's kind of this dig in my heels, get really rigid, and she can't see beyond these thoughts. I can't, I don't want to. And she shared with me, she's like, here's the situation, this is what happened. And my first thought after I found out that we are moving towards this transition was, where's the food? So she recognizes her triggers. There's a problem here, and the way that I'm going to fix it, the way that I know how, the way that I've used for a really long time, is to go eat. it's a great distractor. I don't have to worry about it while I'm eating, right? So there's an example of there is, I guess when I say problem, I'll say this too. That's a perspective. That's a perception. And so part of our work together is to back up and say, is this actually a problem? Or maybe what is there about the situation that we can, is there something to be solved here? And rather than I can't, what is it about the situation that you can influence and that you can do? And is there something that you could say to your supervisor? So we're moving from a place of disempowerment to, and that's a perceived disempowerment, because when we look at her particular situation, she does have, you know, she has a boss that she can be very open with and candid with, and you know, the boss isn't taking away her sense of power and autonomy. And now can we move her into a sense of agency and competence? So there's.
So I want to say, first of all, I just want to compliment you that on a dead run, you were so committed to your alliteration of the letter P that you instantly went for perceived, perception, and perspective as caveats to problems. So that's impressive to me. That was. But I also want to say, because I mean, that was an unbelievably good course correction, because you're right. I mean, what we see as a problem today that would create a trigger like that can certainly be alleviated because we address the actual problem. So the quote problem could stay there, could be there a month from now, a year from now, but your reaction could be totally different. And
yes,
you and I rarely disagree on things like this, but we very, very often are looking at different facets. We could, you know, if there was a coin, you and I are almost always going to be on opposite sides of the coin, but it's the same coin. So when I hear you talking about the psychological perspective and what's happening emotionally, I automatically go to, okay, what's happening in the brain? What's the neurochemical pathway? And when somebody goes to eat that food, they're perceiving this problem, this threat. Wow, if I can go distract myself with food, that amazing dopamine that I get is just like aloe vera on a sunburn. My brain feels so much better now. And that's exactly why my brain drove me to the kitchen to get those cookies. And a lot of people, I just think it helps to understand that there really are physical mechanisms happening in our brain that we can understand, because sometimes emotion and feelings and things like that are so difficult to conceptualize. So I just want to throw that in there from the Joe naturalist perspective.
No, thank you for that. I completely agree with you. From the neurological perspective, to have that is really helpful. And you're reminding me of a podcast that I listened to recently. Brene Brown, she has a great podcast, by the way. If you haven't, it's new, and of course she's awesome, and all of her interviews are awesome. But she was interviewing these two actors and activists, and they were talking about how, you know, they're at a point in their career where they feel like they don't have to hustle so much, but they were saying that it's really uncomfortable for them to go into like dinner parties and social situations and networking and kind of the wine and dine situations, and how, you know, if you don't have something, like you're not a smoker and you're not a drinker and you're not walking around with like some booze or a glass of wine that becomes your social lubricant, it can be a massive challenge. So yeah, I mean, for
shield.
it, absolutely. Yes, that helps you kind of lower your inhibitions a bit. And yeah, so, you know, I will say that I think in some situations there is nothing necessarily wrong with using food to feel a bit more comfortable in situations. But in most of the cases that I'm working with, it's become very dysfunctional. So just a little kind of caveat there. Yeah. So the second one, Joe, is permanency. And what I mean by this is that a lot of individuals go into this sense of, this is never going to end. It's always going to be this way. Their brain goes into this very threat detecting place, and oh my God, like they become, this is forever. I mean, this is permanent. And what studies have shown, actually, if we're going to look at this from a very emotional perspective, because people get stuck in a sense of unchangingness, especially about what this feeling is, whether it's fear or depression or sadness or anger, because it can feel so intense. It's like, oh my God, if I let myself feel this, that can literally mean that it will not end. It will go on forever. So I need to do something to stop it, right? But what studies show is that when we can let the emotion flow, let it move, and you've heard me say this before, emotion is energy. It's energy in the body. It's energy in motion. It inherently moves and shifts and morphs if we let it. If we let an emotion take its course, it will literally only last for about 90 seconds. 90 seconds. Basically like a wave. A wave, and then it comes up over the shore, and then it washes back out, right? And what happens when we stand in the way of a wave? Like we get smacked by it. And that, I think, a lot of times is what people fear, that's going to happen. And it may feel very intense, and based on our histories of trauma and different things, like, however, the better we can become at letting it flow, the less intensity it is going to feel like it's hitting us with. Eating in an attempt to stop the wave galvanizes the wave. It's like, I'm going to build a dam. I'm going to eat, and I'm going to build a dam for this emotion. And like, it's just going to grow, and the water's going to get higher and higher and higher and higher until the dam breaks or it overflows. And that's literally what it can feel like inside of us.
You know, of all of the ways that you have made my life better, Kori, when you pointed out to me years ago that I was a catastrophizer, and I had never even heard of that term, didn't know the concept. I will say that I did not consciously think of it as, wow, every time I get triggered or heightened or passionate about something, that this is permanent. But yet I acted that way and I thought that way. I didn't consciously say this is never going to end. But my body reacted, my brain reacted like that was the case. And I'm not kidding, man. Just like any form of meditation or mindfulness, just time after time after time of recognizing that, disengaging from that, it's neuroplasticity. You practice those neural pathways to take a different route. And now I'm almost the opposite. Now, like it takes a lot to actually get me riled up in a way that I could have maybe 10 years ago. And I have to say, you know, I love your metaphor, the wave crashing and building the dam. But to bring back in the neurophysiology, you know, if you have neurons, that one thought or one stimulus has to flow from one neuron to the next, to the next, to the next. It's because chemicals are being secreted between synapses. And that loop is just going to keep going, and it's going to be reinforced, like you said. So if you can envision the fact that you have this overactive triggering mechanism, your amygdala, something like that, is saying, man, you know, fight or flight, pick up your sword, go kill somebody, go to the cupboard and get the Oreos. This is war. You literally have to stop those chemical messengers from reacting. The only way you can do that is for you consciously, because your brain creates thoughts and your thoughts change your brain, and that's a never ending loop. You have to stop it. It takes deliberate, intentional thinking to change your thinking.
Or because when we're in a heightened threat situation like that, it's not going to work very well to think. We can't think with real clarity.
That's why it takes practice and time, because you're right, it is not easy.
We have to do the training when we're not in those heightened states. So that's why different forms of meditation are really beneficial. Or we do something physiologically. We do something with our bodies to put ourselves in a position where we can begin to think differently. So because emotion is energy in motion, then move. What we typically end up doing is we go sit. And that can block it even more. Go for a walk, go for a jog, move your body in a way that feels good to you. Go for a run, go walk, grab the phone and talk to someone to give you some perspective while you're walking. So yes, we have two choices here, but in a binge eating situation, what happens is, and this is what's interesting, Joe, is there is movement, and it's a very repetitive movement. For a long time. A true binge may last a while. And this is why people like to binge on snacky foods too, because M&Ms, rice cakes, they're individual things that we can keep picking up. And so it's rhythmic. And what I think of kids, what do we do to calm them down? We rock them. We sing to them. There's a rhythm.
Oh man, this is a great visual, because I think also of people with Asperger's or social anxiety, and they'll do the same thing. They just rock back and forth. They keep touching themselves. They'll do, and that's just your brain trying to get that stuck needle into a different groove.
It just like a record player. It's like I used to have a record player, and I don't even feel like I'm not that old. But when it repeats, and we have to get it. We have to move it. We have to pick it up, and yeah.
When you're nervous, tapping your toes,
Yes.
fidgeting, these kind of things.
Swinging my leg. Yeah.
That's an incredibly good insight, because I'm always, of course, focused on what we can do physically and neurologically. And that's, I think you're exactly right. That's a great training technique too for kids. When kids are super emotional, heightened, you got a little 5-year-old tyrant and just in this power battle, you make the kid go run around the yard or do 20 push-ups or something. And all of a sudden it's like, wow, everything calms back down.
The intensity is lowered. Yeah. Yep.
Good practical advice.
Cool. Okay, so the third one is personalization. And you can probably guess what this means just by the word. But when we tend to take things very personally. I'm working with a woman right now, and this is coming up for her in a relationship situation. So she's been dating this guy kind of on and off. They live in different places, but when he comes into town every 3 or 4 months, for example, they get together. And they have very different ideas about what they want the relationship to look like and how she wants more. And he's just like, I'm kind of good with this. That's hard for her. So personalization looks like her having spent the weekend with him, coming back into her normal environment, him going back to where he lives, and her thinking, wait, what is wrong with me that he doesn't want to do this differently? What's wrong with me? So she's gathering up all of the responsibility for his decision and taking it upon herself to say, this is about me. This is mine. And she's turning the mirror around and looking at herself, as opposed to turning it back out here and saying, wait, what are all the other variables that are part of the situation? So, I mean, that can be incredibly damaging. She's got this feeling of disappointment, and she's turning that feeling of disappointment into a questioning of her self-worth. And as she described it to me, she hasn't binged since we've been working together for 2 months, but then this incident happened, and this was a trigger for her. She noticed exactly what she was doing. She noticed it. Yeah.
I think today it sounds like you've just basically taken a psychological assessment of me and said, of all the things Joe needs to work on, we're going to discuss today in this podcast. I mean, those are literally all parts of my personality that I have had to come to terms with. And you're right. I've always mentioned to you so many times that my wife is one of the most chill people you'll ever meet. Like, nothing, you could literally insult her personally and she wouldn't take it personally. You could, the opposite happens with me. And so it's really an interesting thing, because it makes life so much better. You cannot get her upset. And therefore you don't see her struggle with things like this. When it comes to self-control, discipline, since nothing bothers her, it's an amazing difference. And I've really had to try and push myself in that direction.
Joe, I can relate. This is something that I see almost on the daily for myself too. Like, wait a second, like, self-check, literally self-check. You are not responsible for everything that is happening here. And no, this has nothing to do with who you are as a person, Kori. No, maybe there were some behaviors on your part perhaps that weren't ideal. Let's look at that. But to tear down who you are as an individual as a result of what has occurred, yeah, we need to look at the bigger picture.
As an aside, just from Joe to Kori, I think this is a Malcolm Gladwell kind of book right here. Mm-hmm. This particular content, when you're looking at, these aren't just triggers for binge eating. They are triggers for any kind of compulsive or impulsive behavior that you're not happy with in your life. And these are, you categorically listed all of the underlying things. I mean, you may expand it into subpoints, but these are huge, huge things for people to realize. I think, wow, like if somebody was writing these things down and they were doing self-checks, you could work a lifetime on these 3 points and just continue to get happier and happier with your own life.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you for that, Joe. Yeah. This is what happens when we're like half an hour before we're going to record a podcast, and I'm like, what are we going to talk about?
That's perfect though. That's, so people ask me that all the time when it comes to social media and marketing. Like, I don't know what to post. And I always say, post about things happening in your life, whatever is real, whatever is authentic. Mm-hmm. A client might have asked you this question, or it's something that you're struggling with. Whatever is relevant to you is going to be relevant to a lot of people.
Absolutely.
So I think that's key. That's as authentic as it gets.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, thanks for watching and listening. Thank you, Dr. Kori Propst. One of these times where I'm taking notes, and I'm probably going to have to do some self-therapy later just to process all this. But hope you guys as listeners and viewers enjoyed it as well. And you can always share this with people who you think might be struggling with some of these things. I think that'd be a great help. And we'll see you next time in the Life Mastery Podcast.
Thanks, guys.